Hey, what's up? I'm Clayton. I'm the host of Making Insight, and I can't believe we're already at episode 5. This episode, I bring on a good friend of mine down in Austin, Texas. His name is Chris Van Loan II. Chris is a videographer, and he works with a lot of entrepreneurs, more specifically personal development entrepreneurs, but you'll hear more about that as we get into the episode. Chris has a really good background, and he's worked with some incredible entrepreneurs out there, one being Gary Vee, which we talk about later in the episode. But he also shares some unique perspectives on just the journey of being a creative and entrepreneur himself that I hope you'll enjoy. So let's jump right in. Making Insight, episode 5. I have Chris Van Loan II with me, and we're going to get into filmmaking and what it means to become an artist with audio and video work. You are that guy. I'm thrilled to have you on to Making Insight. Chris Van Loan II, please introduce yourself. Thank you for being here.
All right. Happy to be here, and always welcome to come stay here if you're ever coming through Austin, Texas.
I'm overdue. Really?
Yeah. Great city. As for the intro, my name's Chris Van Loan II, and I am really a content director for personal development entrepreneurs. At least that's how I market myself. And I run Van Loan Film Co., which is a video production agency here in Austin, Texas. And I have a lot of really cool clients I work with, some in kind of entrepreneurship, marketing space, and of course, personal development. And we were talking a bit offline about what that means exactly. And I don't know. I mean, I love content that inspires people to be their best selves or take action towards becoming a better person or greater self-understanding. And so a lot of that content I consume in my own free time. I was telling someone I listen to probably about 20 podcasts a week, like recreationally, like just for fun. And a lot of them are kind of in that genre of education or betterment of self. Yeah, that's a bit about me. That's what I love to do, and really blessed that somehow this is a job.
That's also how we connected. I want to say it was a little over 4 years ago when I was podcasting the first time around. I stumbled upon your podcast probably because you were working with Ryan Moran with capitalism, and I was listening to that podcast at the time. But you had also kickstarted your own podcast, Podcast People. Tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so Podcast People really started when I noticed that a lot of my private conversations with family and friends were starting off with, hey, I just listened to this amazing podcast about this, or, oh, this reminds me about this podcast I just heard. And at a certain point, it became like more difficult not to create the show because I was just overflowing with so many anecdotes and so much passion for the things that I was learning from this medium. And so I decided to start the show to review my favorite podcasts. Meaning I was thinking, well, there are reviews for movies and albums and TV shows and every other form of media. And there's so many podcasts out there, but no one is acting as the curator to say, hey, out of all of the stuff out there, this is an amazing show that more people need to know about. And this is how it affected me. And this is how it relates to my life. And here's what I think you would learn from checking out this podcast. So it started out with me doing a lot of like 8 to 15-minute reviews of my favorite shows. And it actually has been evolving a little bit more to become an interview show where now I like to interview podcasters about podcasting. So it's very meta in that sense that there's a lot of conversations about content and just about, how to be effective in the medium of podcasting and how people monetize content and actually make a living out of it. I mean, we are living in such interesting times where I always stumble across these people who are making like over $100K a year running a page for like labradoodles or golden retrievers or like these extreme like niche things. Like I'm the world's preeminent like teenage mutant ninja turtles enthusiast or whatever. And it's so interesting because I'm about to go home in a little bit here for Thanksgiving and see my mom's family in a very small town, Kingman, Arizona. It's like 30,000 people there. And it's funny how I think like from their perspective, it was like none of this is like a real job, but that's the economy we're living in. You know, that's the world we're living in. And so I should probably do more podcast people episodes. But it's really just been a passion project and a labor of love for me to have the conversations I want to have. And spoiler alert, speaking of Thanksgiving, I am thinking about interviewing my 89-year-old grandma about her life and her experiences. And so basically this hinges upon if she says yes. I'm gonna
Does she
I'm gonna go
know?
out. Well, she knows I have the show, but I haven't, and I've had my dad on the show, but I haven't actually propositioned her, asked her directly yet. So I'm just gonna go out there with 2 microphones and a camera and a little baby tripod, and hopefully she'll say yes because I just really want to ask her about how, like, her whole life, how things have changed. You know, since like the 1940s and 50s, and her relationship with technology, and what I think historically we've always had a lot of reverence for the wisdom of our elders. And we're also in this culture where we tend to not care about what people over 65 think. And it's like, well, maybe we need to circle back and really, if we're willing to listen without our own ideas and just come to the conversation open. I'm really hoping that I could learn something from grandma.
I think that's amazing. I would definitely look forward to hearing that. And I mean, you bring up a good point. I totally aware that I try to at times, but I'm not doing it enough whenever I see my grandparents or other family elders who lived a life that I probably knew nothing about before I was born. They'll occasionally speak on certain stories, but like to really open up space to dig into what certain experiences were like for them at different moments in their life, I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think with family particularly, it's hard to go first and be willing to risk, I don't know, looking silly or being vulnerable. But the reality is, like, everybody just wants to be seen and understood. So I think there's a lot of value to approaching those elders in our family and saying, like, yeah, so what do you think about this? What's going on with you? Like,
Do you think it will take asking the right questions? Because I think with some of my family members, they will talk about things. Just you have to ask the right question, and then they'll chat for hours.
Well, it's funny you say that because as we were talking about podcast people, I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of like the art of the right question. Because I remember when I was like in elementary school, middle school, high school, I would be driven around, I'd be like driven to school or picked up from school by my mom and dad, and we would listen to actually a lot of talk radio. And I loved these shows on TV, like Inside the Actor Studio, where it was like a long form conversation with different actors about their career. And Terry Gross on Fresh Air with NPR, or Charlie Rose would do these long form interviews on PBS. And I don't know, that's like something so like meaty around having the time and space to go deep that I wasn't seeing on other talk shows. As much as I love like Conan O'Brien, your whatever, David Letterman's, those kind of things, which are just like so concise, and it's like, come on and tell me this anecdote and get in and get out. And so yeah, I've always thought that, wow, if you could come with the right question and ask it in the right way and ask it with the right tone in your voice, you can unlock some magic there. It's like a key into someone's heart or someone's mind. And so, yeah, honestly, I feel like I've spent like half of my life trying to figure out, like, what are those questions?
And that's a driver for me on having this podcast. I feel like the art of conversation is a dialogue back and forth that involves being able to have questions come up on the spot from intuition or just state of pure listening from the other person that allows you to ask a incredible power question. And I feel like I'm tapping into what's his name? He's the negotiator, Chris Voss.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of podcasts with him. Doesn't he like negotiate with like terrorists and high stakes situations with SWAT teams and stuff?
Yeah, and now he's just a public speaker who probably monetized his brand off that 20 or 30 years of work that he spent negotiating with criminals.
Probably a lot more chill now talking to
Yeah,
like being on stage and doing podcasts and stuff.
but I know he is somebody who I just get communication techniques from that I would love to replicate on demand, but it does take work and repetition. And that's part of what this podcast is for, is become a better communicator and also learn from really cool people on really cool things that I just find interesting. One of those things with you is you are somebody who gets to be inside some pretty sacred spaces and communities just from your videography and audio production. What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'd say first and foremost, I just think it's like an honor and a privilege that I sometimes it comes with a little bit of imposter syndrome that
I could believe that.
it's like, am I just the camera guy or am I something more here? You know, I just went to Los Angeles for a 3-day business event called the Four Rooms Mastermind Level Up in LA. And then there was one night where we all got to go to the Magic Castle, which is a magic venue where some of the best magicians in the world perform. And I'm there with all of these business owners who are doing over $1 million a year in revenue in order to be qualified to be in part of the group. And so part of me feels like I'm the least successful person in the group, even though I've passed 6 figures a year with my business. I still feel like the smallest fish there in the sea. But it was really cool. I mean, it's one of the only places I feel like in the country left where there's like a strictly enforced dress code. Like men have to wear suits, women have to wear dresses. There's no sneakers allowed. You have to wear a tie, or like one will be provided for you if you can't. So that kind of vibe. But at the same time, I've been a part of like personal growth communities and spiritual communities. And I don't know, it just takes me back to when I left film school. I got into weddings because I didn't really know exactly how else to make a living with a camera, and I didn't want to get a traditional job. And I'm also a little bit of a romantic too, so that may have been a factor. And I did about 65 weddings before I got a little burnt out on them. But I interned under this guy, Josh Baker. He's an incredible photographer who has
Okay.
been doing this entire life. And he told me that your camera can be your passport and it can also be your shield. And it always really stuck with me. And that I thought I was like doing this one thing of like capturing images, creating images. But he was trying to tell me that if you stick with this, it's going to let you into a lot of rooms you wouldn't ordinarily get to be let into. But you can also hide behind it. It's also an excuse to leave a conversation, to slip out of the room, to not have to look someone in the eyes and engage with them on like a personal level. You can hide behind the camera, or you can also use it as this thing that's going to let you travel the world. I mean, just with my video work, I've gotten to go to Ukraine, Romania, Costa Rica, Denver, you know, like all over the world. And yeah, it's just been unexpected and better than I really could have ever anticipated when I was first going through film school. But yeah, no, I mean, I would say I simultaneously feel inside the group and outside of the group, which is a weird place to be in both of those at the same time.
And would you say some of these communities are communities that you would actually be looking to be a part of, even if it wasn't for the work that you're doing?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, also consider myself privileged to have gotten to a certain point where there's like nothing I have to do for the money, where I really am only taking on projects that I find are interesting or rewarding or making the world a better place. And when that's your criteria, the bar you're setting, not a lot of communities really qualify. It's very subjective. And a lot of the time, I'm just going with my gut. I'm just like following the vibes, which isn't necessary. Like, I don't know if I could recommend that as a business strategy, but I don't know. It's worked out great for me. So maybe there is something to that, right?
I know there's people out there who just probably go by the data all the time, but I feel like I'm becoming somebody who is leaning towards intuition and trusting the gut.
Yeah, I heard on a podcast once, like, here I go. This is why I had to start podcast people, because I start a lot of sentences that way. And I don't even remember which podcast it was. They said, when you're taking on a new job, you're actually selecting who you want to become and who you want to be more like. So people look at the criteria of job A versus job B has this amount of compensation and these perks, instead of sometimes saying, do I want to shift my personality and my values to become more like group A or group B? Because like humans are social creatures, and we're going to end up, I'm just a big believer of this idea that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I've also heard an alternate take on that, which is to say,
What's that?
you're like the 5 people that you aspire to be like the most, or the 5 people you look up to the most. And so that could be a podcaster, that could be a YouTuber, that could be your boss, that could be your coworker, it could be a buddy, but it
Chris
doesn't
Hanlon the second.
necessarily mean you have to have even met them in real life. But I certainly, as someone who grew up without any siblings myself, I've tended to select these like big brother, big sister, auntie kind of role models. And I think the reason for that is because there's a part of me that goes like, I want to be a little bit like that. Like they're more outgoing, they're more extroverted, they seem to have more direction in their life. And so it's interesting. I was working with a business coach for about a year and a half, and we kind of got to a point where I was like, I think I'm good. I'm really just need to figure out what I want out of life. And one day he said to me, these people you're looking up to, they've all figured out how to take control over their life. And I was like, whoa, I never noticed that. I never realized that, because a lot of my heroes and people I look, they're all in like different industries. They all do very different things. But then I realized like the one commonality is they've figured out how to take control of like how they spend their time, what they're doing, deciding their own values, and some level of like financial freedom. I mean, I'd say I've achieved some level of financial freedom, not because I don't ever have to work again, but because like all the work I do, I enjoy. I don't have a boss. It's all like consensually entered into all of my agreements and contracts. So yeah, so I could just ramble on this one point for the whole
No,
podcast. So I'll cut myself off here.
it makes me think about the same exact idea that circulates my life. I could tell you right now, you're the 5th guest on Making Insight, and all 5 of my first 5 guests, there is something about their lives that I respect, appreciate, and look at as in, I don't want to be any of you, but there are facets of your life that I'm like, I would never hate if I had that same control or quality that you have over your life. And it's almost like inspirational, and it's like, it's like a driver, like, let me spend a little bit more time around that to really understand what's the mindset behind it, what's the behaviors, what's the attitudes. Like you all have something that really stands out to me.
Yeah, like, and so often it's not that I want to trade lives. It's like, man, I just want like 10% of that. If I could just have like a little bit of that characteristic in my own life. And I think it's very unconscious. We're talking about my old boss, Ryan Moran, for 3 years. And in a weird way, it kind of like took a little bit of getting used to having like a really rich, wealthy, kind of like famous friend, because you go to the airport with them and someone will stop Ryan and say, hey man, oh, I love your YouTube so much. I've been listening to your podcast for 5 years. And he's got like a lake house and like a Tesla and like another house and all these investments and all these people respect him. But then there's a lot of power in having these like larger than life characters like humanized and seeing them as just a guy, just a normal person. And so there's kind of like the myth, the legend, the larger than life internet persona. There's like the real life person. But then there's a lot of power to being able to observe someone's habits. And so we would travel and he would be working on emails and checking things and working on his laptop on the plane, in the hotel, in the evenings, at night, and thinking about deals and money and wealth building strategies. And for him, it's really fun and exciting. And it's another example of me going like, yeah, I want some of that, but I don't want all of it. Whereas like, I really don't want to hustle that hard or be that work focused or be that money focused. Like, I just want like 10% of that. I just want 20% of that.
There's trade-offs because, I'm sure there are many people out there who operate like that. And you're somebody who I know wants to play the guitar for 2 hours on a Friday night. And there's people who probably would enjoy that, but give that up and don't do it because they're playing this real life video game. Not saying they shouldn't be playing it. It's just like they're playing the game of life in a very all-in type of way. I don't know. I struggle with that.
I just think, we were talking about some of these people I've had access to, and I feel like it's been a gift to get to vicariously live through some of my clients, people I've worked with, and see that, I don't know, like there's no gold at the end of the rainbow necessarily, unless it's your particular rainbow you're chasing. So if we try to just emulate someone else's path, people will make millions of dollars and then they're still the same person, like deep inside. They still have their same insecurities. I just think like a lot of young men are ambitious, and we've been told this story that in order to be valued as a human being, to be loved, to be worthy, we have to be achievers and doers. And that's great. It feels good to achieve things. But there is that balance to be struck in like living up to society's expectations of us versus like charting our own path.
Yeah, I know on episode 3, I talked with David Richards. He took a course that had taught him there's essentially like 3 ways people operate in this world. And it's either a do have be do have, or a be have do, sort of like triangle. But I believe the optimal mindset to have is, the be have do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it's all about the being first.
Yeah, of course.
Everything is downstream from the being. Yeah, no, I've tried to communicate this idea of being first to my sister, who's 13 years younger than me, and maybe isn't as spiritual, because it seems very airy-fairy and fluffy and not like tangible or something you could measure, put under a microscope. For example, if you think that you are only worthy of a certain kind of treatment from a romantic partner, or you're only worthy of a certain level of compensation or how people talk to you, like people and life will either rise or fall to your expectations of them, And so that's like a kind of an example of like being leads to manifesting things into reality in the real, like tangible 3D world, which is like, well, do you have high standards for yourself? Do you think you deserve to be treated with like respect, or are you kind of okay with people walking all over you? Then you're going to get like what you put out there into the world,
It makes me think about a recent thought of mine that just downloaded one day, but it's like, whatever I'm missing outside of myself is missing inside of myself.
Yeah.
I was trying to think from the perspective of, people who say, oh, okay, like I'm missing this material object outside of myself. So what then could be blocking that inside myself? Is it a subconscious belief rooted in self-doubt, unlove?
Here's when I catch myself in these thoughts, I try to override like my own programming because at least in my own life, I've noticed that when I start having this inner dialogue that is focused on the lack of something, it only emphasizes and like doubles down and multiplies that lack. It only makes it more apparent. And so if I'm focusing on a lack of love or money or ease, now it's like all I can think about instead of telling myself the story that I'm on the way to having more, to being better, to growing into the next stage. Yeah, I just, particularly as like so much of my work is around language, I think ultimately like the dialogue we have with ourselves is the most important. It's funny. I think part of the reason I'm so drawn to podcasts, I mentioned with you, like how much I love these long form conversations, is like I feel like I'm constantly having a podcast with myself inside my head all the time,
100%.
which is funny. Like sometimes I think it's a little bit much and maybe I should do that less and I don't know, just like be present, meditate.
They say there's
But
people out there who don't have an inner dialogue, and I really want to
it
know what
blows my
that's like.
mind. Yeah, I like it's hard for me to even, wrap my head around that. But when I was in film school, this kind of way my brain is set up, I think helped me with writing dialogue and screenwriting and being able to create a character and know how they would naturally and organically speak and how two people would go back and forth because in my brain, constantly doing that all the time, having these like fake conversations. But it's also really just an exercise in empathy, right? Where I could kind of like have this conversation with myself or with this other person who's not actually there. And yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of value in having these head talks. I mean, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about dialogue and podcasting and conversations like this is that, if you look at like what Plato was talking about and a lot of these like ancient philosophers, they really believed that there was a magic to the power of dialogue and that the only way that we really arrive at truth is basically just bouncing ideas off of each other. If the idea just exists in a vacuum, you
And
kind
that,
of go, I don't know, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But if two people can sit down and say, well, this is my perspective, and go, well, this is my perspective. Oh, I never saw it that way. I think that's ultimately how we come to understand truth. There's a real magic to it that you can't get to on your own or in a vacuum.
I like it. That's totally new to me. I've never considered that.
Magical power of dialogue. I believe in it. At least it's a passion of mine.
So, speaking of passions of yours, you get to surround yourself with a lot of other creatives and entrepreneurs. I actually have two questions from this. We talked about those 5 people earlier of like who we model. I wanted to ask this before. Who are 3 to 5 people that maybe you don't spend too much time around, but are some sort of a role model to you in some respect?
So many to choose from. What's funny is I kind of did an exercise thinking about digital role models once, and one of the people that came up for me was Will Smith. This was before the slap, the big slap moment. But wow, what a story of a guy who like came from nothing and had the vision to become a rapper and then like the biggest movie star in the entire world. Just crazy. My dad comes to mind. Of course, we do spend a bit of time together and talk to each other on the phone. We're really drawn to like Stephen Bartlett of Diary of a CEO, if you know him. And then, of course, like
Yes.
Tim Ferriss of the Tim Ferriss Show. And as I bring up these examples, it kind of reminds me that like maybe I don't know exactly what my big thing is yet or what path I'm on because these are all like big, famous, extremely wealthy and influential people. And yet, like if I'm honest, like I'm okay living a life without the fame and the absurd amount of wealth and it's probably a more peaceful path. Like I love it when um I can enjoy an entire Sunday without getting a single text message, right? So we were talking a little bit about isolation and solitude. And so I don't know. Maybe it comes back to these heroes of mine that I've picked. There's traits in them I want. There's little bits and pieces where I'm like, yeah, give me like 10% of this in my own life. But I'm not necessarily thinking like, man, I would love to be them.
Hey, look at somebody like Justin Bieber who can't even go to the gym without being,
Yeah.
bombarded by photographers or who knows, paparazzi. But like, I know there's going to be people out there who argue, well, yeah, look at, he's got a bunch of money to make up for that. But what's the value in going to the grocery store and having the ability to be unbothered?
Yeah, a
Uh,
lot of value there. I
those
mean, if
mundane
I'm
experiences.
honest, my favorite artist of all time in any genre, inside of music or outside of music, right, is probably like Kanye West. And this isn't someone who's in good mental health or has a life that I would want in any way. And yet, no, he's had such a big impact on the world and on music as a producer, as a public figure. And some of these are just cautionary tales, I guess.
Makes me think back to what I was thinking about when you were talking about being able to surround yourself with people where you almost get to be exposed to their life and see the life they're living and get a taste of it and realize like, there's a part of me that could live that, but I'm glad I'm seeing it from this point of view because it makes me feel comfortable with the life that I'm living. And what I was thinking about then was, yeah, I was in a men's group a couple months ago, and this question was posed, and it's one that I keep coming back to. But like, rather than asking what do I want to experience in this life, reframing it to ask what do I want life to experience through me. And I feel like once I
Hmm.
started doing that, I like there are so many things I'm giving up now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a really interesting reversal to think about the effect we have on the world and those around us, right? So I don't know, just with that specific example, I think about when I was working at a media agency when I was like 28 years old, and I had maybe 5 people working under me as director of content who I was like supervising and managing and giving orders to. And there is a part of me that like learned a lot and benefited a lot from the experience, but there's a part of me that like kind of bristles against the idea of like being someone's boss and doesn't love it. And so sometimes when I'm around wealthy people who are too comfortable ordering others around, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. There's something classist around not looking at other people as human beings and just looking at them as like a means to an end to achieve your objectives. Now, obviously, you can be an awesome boss who's not like that. There's just a part of me that really likes a more egalitarian view of just like looking at everyone as like human beings and equals. And so the whole idea of hierarchy like that feels very artificial and just doesn't sit well with me. And so when you bring up this idea of like, do I want to be like a big executive? I could achieve so much, I could change a lot, but it comes with other stuff. It comes with having to be people's boss. And there are some great bosses out there, for sure. I didn't have a lot of them in my own life.
Really?
It's a tough position to be in, you
Did you,
know.
you've mentioned one of your ex-bosses. Were you running any of your own projects while he was your boss, or when you left that job role, did that require you to then form, your own business and take on the type of work that you've been doing over recent years?
Yeah, no, podcast people was started when I had a job, but as far as like true side hustles that were money makers, there's a part of me that's just like I'm an all-in person. And so as like when I'm all in on a job, that's just kind of my focus. And so people were constantly throwing opportunities at me for freelancing and side hustles and saying, hey, I know you have a full-time job, but if you're free this weekend, we would love to hire you for this. Or maybe you could do a little bit of consulting on the side and it'll only take an hour or 2 hours a week. And I just feel like I have such a finite energy when it comes to spreading myself too thin. I have this feeling of if I give 2 hours a week to this little side project thing, it's going to water down my main focus. And so for me, that is what's great about running my own business. It's been 4 years now. I've been self-employed. Is there's so much variety within Van Loan Film Co. That is, I could work on the website. I can work on leads. I can work on editing. I can work on projects. I can start calling people. And I mean, there's just, it never ends. And so it's a great example of like an infinite game where there's just no end. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is what game I'm playing right now, like in life. And so for me, honestly, this has been very much the year of freedom, and really for the first time in my life, figuring out what it's like and enjoying like making money and spending money. Like this is the most money I've ever spent in my entire life in the last like 12 months by far. And what's great about that is I think I'll get bored of it in like a year or two or three. You know, the solitude, the stuff. There's a part of me that's thinking like, I think I want to upgrade my Infinity and get like a nice Lexus, you know, like a nice Lexus GS 350, 300 horsepower, black luxury seats. But there's a part of me that knows like once I get that car, I'm still the same person and nothing changes. But it's like we almost have to get to the end of these games to get to the next game. And so then maybe I'll get to a point of like, okay, I've created financial security. Maybe it's time for a relationship. Maybe it's time for a family. Maybe it's time to be challenged by stepping into the leadership role where I am a boss and I do have employees, you know? And so, yeah, I just can't help but think that in order for us to know what direction we want to go to next, it changes like at every level. And so it's like, I don't know what 45-year-old Chris wants until I get to 40-year-old Chris, if that makes any sense. And I'm trying more and more to, instead of seeing around the corners, just like be in the present.
What led you to ultimately decide that a traditional career path was not for you and that you needed to take the leap and start your own creative venture?
There's something that's always been drawing me towards the entrepreneur life. Part of it is just that it's like exciting. There's adrenaline that comes with it. People have come to me and said, "Oh man, I want to do that too." You know, want to say like, "Well, you might have to accept that your monthly income is going to be 1x this month and then 2x or 3x the next month and then 0.5 or 0.3x the next month. There's going to be like a lot of variation. It's going to be like hard times and good times. But in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm living the dream of my dad and my dad's best friend, who actually just passed away this year. So my dad had this best friend, Howie, from West Philadelphia, you know, where Will Smith is from. And I don't know, I always remember that my dad is living in the suburbs and he's commuting into the city every single day, working at a boss to pay off the mortgage and support the family. And he would always point out to me, and he was fascinated with this idea that he's like on his way to work and maybe he would pop in real quick at a coffee shop and he would grab a drink, like grab a latte or something and go to work. Go to the office, go to the cubicle, like literally in a cubicle for 20 or 30 years. And he would look at that person in the corner on their laptop and just curious, like, what are they doing? What are they doing for a living? Are they like a screenwriter? Are they doing emails? Are they doing digital marketing? It was just this mysterious thing of like, are they just like a trust fund kid who just doesn't have to work? You don't know. But there was always this fascination with the person who gets to decide how they want to use their time. And I think in a lot of ways, we can't help but listen to the subtext or kind of what's underneath the words of our parents, where my dad was looking at these people who were living a more free life than he was and saying like, man, I kind of wish I could do that. My dad is thinking, I wish I could be a musician or a music producer or, you know, do something cool that isn't like following the orders of a boss in a cubicle. And, you know, I had my own taste of that. I remember one time I worked for, I was doing technical support for a video game company. And I did it for about 2 weeks before I hit like a breaking point, and I couldn't even give them my 2 weeks notice. It was like, when the cop like hands in their badge and their gun. I had a badge to get in the building, and I talked to my boss, and I was like, look, man, I just don't think this is working. I was like, I I know I should give you my 2 weeks notice, but like I think I just gotta go. And he understood. And I was just unemployed for a bit and I figured it out. But I think it speaks to there's just something about my personality or my upbringing that's just like not suited to be an employee. And now that we're here in 2024, I don't think I can ever go back to having a boss ever again.
I'm sorry, but what you talk about really takes me back to like that be have do. I think about your conversation or you hearing the stories about your dad walking around like coffee shops and seeing people and saying, I wish I could have that. It just makes me think like there are people out there who block themselves. And this is me in probably certain areas of my life of things that I'm not recognizing, but like you have to be that before you can have it. And if you trust that you be it, then whatever you're meant to have will flow to you. And it's kind of like detaching from those outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I just, my experience has shown me that it's like the universe really does work in mysterious ways. There's something to the being first, because 90% of businesses fail. I think I've read in like the first year or something like that. And there were multiple times in the first 2 years where I was really worried. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. And yet, somehow, the universe always just served up that like perfect client, that's perfect project that was fun for me and paid the bills and let me put some money in my pocket. So I don't know. And I really think there is a level of faith in all of the people I look up to and respect and admire. All of my digital mentors is like it's an act of faith to like write a book, launch a YouTube channel, launch a podcast.
Learning that hands on,
Yeah.
there are so many things that go behind just hopping behind a camera and speaking in front of a mic that could really make a quality podcast. The planning process of getting people to be open to coming to talk to you. I love it. I know you feel the exact same way, probably with having that space to bring on people who inspire you.
Did you, by any chance, check out my podcast with Cole Whitty, the psychedelic coach? This was a conversation pod I put out, I
I
don't know, maybe like
actually,
2 months ago.
I was going to say, I felt like it was in the past few months. I want to say I listened to pieces of it because I was pretty intrigued. She had some takes on some subjects that I remember you posting about that, like, I hadn't heard elsewhere.
Yeah.
Like, I think one of them was how, like, certain substances have control over people because people let them have control over them. I feel like I'm not grasping that entirely just because it was a while ago, but I feel like that was one of them.
Yeah, just someone that came to mind for me as someone I just found interesting, fascinating. I want to learn their perspective more. Maybe we don't even agree on everything. When I think about her worldview and how she's living her life, and it's like, again, it's I don't know. I love what I do and heard what she does with like live events and group coaching and one-on-one coaching. Just sounds like exhausting to me. Like they're just always busy and hustling, but I think it just comes back to this conversation we're having about intuition, which is I'm not looking at people with a spreadsheet going, this is their follower count and this is how famous they are and this is what I stand to gain. But it's like it's all just like following the curiosity when it comes to guest selection too.
Yeah, I'm sure probably what do I feel like inside when I'm talking to this person, when I'm around this person, recording this person, really being able to have that awareness of those feelings, whether they be physical or, emotionally felt.
Well, Speaking of, let me ask you, what do you think has been the most challenging thing about starting on this journey for you? Because for me, I'm simultaneously trying to listen and conduct the interview and ask the right questions. And it's like really hard
Right.
to do both.
Absolutely. Because there's a lot of times, I mean, even in this episode where like you're bringing up some really good pieces of conversation and tossing out some wisdom out there that in the moment I want to respond and ask another question, but I also don't want to interrupt and I want to let you finish. And by the time you finish, I've thought of like three more and I'm on the next, like, I don't even get to ask that initial one. And also, what I'm learning is part of becoming a better communicator and listener, and that's being a reason why I'm doing podcasting, is there's a lot of times I find myself asking questions that are like in the form of run-on sentences. Like there's no smart brevity to it. It's like just ask the most simplest form of that question, but I find ways to like build complexity into the question and make it longer than it should be rather than like a 5 word, hey, what do you think about this?
You could call this whole podcast the art of the question. Because it's like, as well, I was just thinking about Chris Williamson. Sometimes it's just like so short and concise. And then
Yes,
sometimes
exactly.
Tim Ferriss will like ramble for 3 minutes and say, I'm not sure what the question is there, but would you respond to that? And sometimes those are good too. So it's like, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way here other than to just be true to yourself and say, follow the curiosity.
And with following that curiosity, like sometimes I'm trying to really absorb everything you and my other guests are saying because I actually want to like be able to reflect on that. And that's why I'm here because I'm learning about it, but also trying to do that and then have some sort of response or follow-up question to that. That's where that like challenge is having that ready while also getting to like fully absorb what was just said to you.
Well, I think you're on a good path because as someone who's been professionally producing
Thank you.
podcasts since like 2017, a lot of people see the medium as like just a means to an end, which is they're like, I'm not really that curious. I don't like, I guess I want to talk to these people, but I really just want to have a big audience and want to figure out how to monetize it.
I
And it's
thought
like, man, everything in life though is like you make something of value that is unique and everything else will just come afterwards. If it's meant to be. And maybe that isn't a monetary thing. Maybe you just grow as a person.
absolutely. I definitely fell into that trap first time I did the podcast. I am so grateful for all the people who I interviewed, but I think something turned in me where like I got so focused on the external outcome and feedback from the podcast. Whereas in when I started it, I was like, whoa, I want to talk to these few people because I'm so freaking curious about their life. First guest I had on my podcast ever, my first ever episode. It's a shame that I can't remember his name. He was the founder of Kai's nutrition bars.
Oh,
And
okay.
he started the company out of like good faith effort in trying to, you know, turn some of those turn some of the profit from his product and use that to serve some really underserved parts of the world and some like third world countries. It's kind of fascinating because like I think back and I'm like, how did this person ever agree to talk to somebody who didn't have any podcast episodes yet recorded, but was like, yeah, I'll give you 2 hours of my time.
Wild.
And that's kind of what kicked it off. And I think from then, like after I got like through 13, 14, 15, I was like, nobody is listening to this other than me. And I'm putting all this time into editing. And ultimately, I forgot really what drove me to do it in the first place is like my fascination in what other people find truly purposeful about some sort of mission that they're on or some sort of project that they're doing or business that they're running. And I sat with the itch for 4 years. Here we are again.
Well, I think I've told you a little bit about how I fell in love with cameras and the filmmaking side when I was 11 years old. I watched Good Will Hunting, which just blew my mind because I didn't know you could do that with a movie. have like real characters that felt so real and this amazing drama and acting and storytelling. And I still feel the same way, even though I'm not spending a lot of time and energy on narrative films or documentary films. I still just think it's magic. I mean, it's crazy that like this camera is capturing light waves and sound waves, writing it onto like an SD card, and then I'm manipulating those ones and zeros on a computer to affect someone emotionally, to get someone to take action or feel inspired.
You're pulling them out of their skin suit and almost virtually like putting them in the shoes on
It's
the
so
other side of
powerful.
those
I
characters.
mean,
Yeah, or
it's
that plot.
funny. I remember thinking very clearly. I think this was like in high school, maybe 17, 18, 19. I was like, there's so many things I'm interested in. What direction do I go? And for me, it felt like film was this amazing synthesis of music and acting and photography and storytelling, like all mixed together, where like the sum is greater or than, damn it, I messed that up. I was on a roll here. The sum is greater than its parts. Where, you know, I think about this example of you're at a stop sign in traffic and you're at the light and there's a guy over here. There's like a homeless man. He's got a sign and needs some money. It's very easy to not pay attention to that human being and like tune them out. But if you're in a movie theater and you see a close up of their face on like a 40-foot screen in front of you, it's such a powerful tool for empathy to like put yourself in that skin suit as you were talking about and go like, oh, what is it like to be them? That's the power of video. And then you throw in like a voiceover dialogue and you throw in some like emotional music with like some strings or like a organ. You know, we get to make all of these creative choices. And I'm basically trying to bring a filmmaking approach to video marketing projects for entrepreneurs. So I was telling you a little bit about Four Rooms Mastermind, my favorite client right now I've been doing a lot of work with. And I attended one of their events, and what I saw in real life was a lot of love, a lot of hugs, a lot of people opening up heart to heart, a lot of people who really saw each other as like chosen family. And then you go on the website and it's like there's a photo booth and there's like somebody like spinning fire and there's somebody like pulling up in like a Lamborghini or a Mercedes, and you got somebody talking. And I was like, there's such a huge disconnect between, it's like ostensibly people join this group to grow their business, but they're really there for the community, for this deeper soul connection to be seen and heard by other people who are on a similar journey as them. And so anyway, to tie this all in, I'm bringing the filmmaking approach to these entrepreneur groups.
That makes me
And
wonder. Go ahead. Please finish.
yeah, it's just, I mean, it's so rewarding to, in a sense, I feel like I'm creating something, but I'm also just documenting what is actually there and emphasizing it the right way through the right selections and shots, the right selections in music. I'll conduct a 30-minute interview with them, and then I will select the sound bites that are going to tell the right story.
So my question there is, a lot of these times when you're first introduced to these clients of yours, are they telling you a vision or a story of theirs that they want told, or are they coming to you and saying, here's what is, you create the story?
It's much more of the latter. The thing I've realized is that these clients who come to me and these entrepreneurs, they're not an expert in what I do. They didn't go to film school. They didn't work at a media agency. They've maybe never edited a video ever. Maybe it's something simple on their phone or an iMovie, right? And so that's when these relationships are at their best, when they're like, I've seen what you do. I just need you to like come and do your magic and capture this. Those relationships are the best when they give me the free rein without micromanaging me. So sometimes I would say initially it was like kind of disappointing that I wasn't getting like clear instructions. But more and more, it's been great to be given creative control for me to step in and say, okay, this event you're running, this group you've got, let me really take a look like under the hood and see why people are actually paying you so much money to be a part of this community, and then figure out how I can tell the story. And from a purpose perspective, because there's a part of me that goes like, well, this isn't really what I set out to do. I set out to like make movies. I actually find this a lot more rewarding than making movies, which is actually kind of like a slow and tedious process made by committee with a large group of people. I was at an event in San Francisco this year, and this guy was talking about ROI and reframing this acronym of return on investment to ripples of impact. And so I see my work as having ripples of impact outward that are going to make the world a better place in ways that I can't even know or predict. And so if I gravitate towards a group of like heart-centered, personal development, spiritual entrepreneurs who are really doing like the work of inner exploration and contribution and service, and then I make a bunch of content for that group, and then other people who are into that are attracted to that, it's going to ripple outward to the world. Yeah, in ways that's like, I don't even know. And so that's what gives me peace at night when I lay my head on my pillow, is I think we all have those existential moments of like, what am I doing here? What game am I playing? I'm spending all this time doing all this stuff, like how is it having an impact more broadly? And I come back to this idea of having faith that the ripples of impact really are making the world a better place. And these powers of storytelling, I think, are like God given in a sense. Like, yeah, I've devoted like my whole life to like working on them and studying them, but it just feels like some code I was given almost like from birth or upbringing.
Absolutely, they were God given. I think back to, we both read this book, The Artist's Way. Is it Julie or Julia Cameron?
Yeah, I forget the name, but I did an audible
Yeah,
audiobook.
it's not even a spiritual book, but she references, the power of God in that. And the three core like affirmations I pulled away from that book that I still write about all the time are: my dreams come from God, and God has the power to accomplish them. My creativity leads me to truth and love, and I'm willing to let God create through me. And those were pathways into me actually like kind of coming to terms with like, whatever created me is infinitely running through me right now in the present. And if that's the case, then like anything is a possibility, even if it's not something I want to pursue. But like, whatever created Albert Einstein is in me because it created me. Does this make sense?
And this is a hot take, and perhaps Adolf Hitler too, right? I mean, I
Absolutely. Yeah.
tend to think that we as individuals think that we're not capable of like darkness and evil, but I think that the honest truth is like, man, we're all capable of the light and the dark, the good and the bad.
One of my favorite quotes was from Jordan Peterson, and he talked about like the difference between a good man and an evil man. And he said the good man is fully aware and recognizable the impact that the evil he would do would cause.
Hmm.
I'm sure you and I are both subjected to like, thoughts that we wouldn't want running through us, but like we have them and we're like, oh, if I did that action, I would not be happy with myself. But like, you're able to make the conscious choice to be like, no, that doesn't align with the goodness that I believe
I mean, I'll give
should
you an
exist.
example because it's like I threw out a big name there that's gonna
Yeah, you're
emotionally
gonna get
trigger
my
some people there.
podcast canceled.
But I think in day-to-day life, I'm seeing those things on a much, much, much smaller level. So yesterday, I got in a new t-shirt from eBay, and it was cool. It was all right, but the print quality was a little bit lower quality than I expected. Like it's a little pixelated, a little blurry, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? It'll be fine for like a gym shirt. But am I proud of it? Am I gonna wear it with honor? I was like a little disappointed, but it's like, you know what? You got a t-shirt from eBay. What do you expect? This isn't like from a store or from like a merch stand at a concert. And so my first instinct was to write them a 1-star review and write like a whole paragraph about how no one should ever buy from them and like go on this whole diatribe. And it's really like the sin of wrath, right? It's really, how do I take vengeance and wrath upon this person? And as I started thinking about it deeper, because these people on the internet are all just like anonymous names, some random seller on eBay, I started thinking like, well, who is this person though, right? Like they have a side hustle or maybe a primary hustle where they're trying to make some money selling t-shirts on eBay.
And
So I'm
what if that, I don't mean to cut you off, but what if that t-shirt is 10 times the quality of the t-shirt they were selling a year ago? And like, that's the
don't know the
growth
journey.
they've achieved. But to you, it's like, oh, this is low quality, but like they derived from like selling ratted up t-shirts, just as an example, you know, with
Yeah.
even worse pixelation, but like that's their growth. You would leave them a 1-star review when in their mind they're like, whoa, I've 10x from where I came from. Like this person doesn't know that.
Maybe my mean-spirited review that was going to be a whole diatribe then convinces them to like hang it up and stop this business and do something else with their life. And yeah, I just, man, I've been through some of these moments where, I started thinking like, what if this is like some Pakistani immigrant in California who is using this business to put food on their table and keep a roof over their head? Or maybe it's some 16-year-old kid who is saving up for, college or some kind of training
Yeah.
program, or they just want to get out of an abusive household where they like hate their parents and their parents are abusive towards them. And so anyway, the whole point, the reason I brought the shirt story is actually just to say that it's like a lot of these decisions we're given in life about who we want to be, I think are very small. And despite all of the personal development work that I've done, all the books I've read, like Awareness by Anthony DeMello and Eckhart Tolle, and all the thousands of podcasts I've listened to, there's still a part of me that is like petty, insecure, wrathful, judgmental. And so
So
I don't
imperfect.
think I don't think I'm ever going to get to some summit or peak where I'm like this enlightened individual. Like I'm probably still going to be like 50 years old, catching myself, catching my worst impulses and my worst thoughts and going like, "Whoa, hold on a second. Hold on." That's just part of being human, you know? And so I think as much as I was almost embarrassed that I was going to leave this 1-star review, we also have to have some grace and just be like, I'm just a human, you know? We're emotional beings, just doing my best.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, does all of what we're doing really matter? It matters to us in the present and who we are, but in the whole grand scheme of this existence, like, you know, we're on this ball spinning around another ball in the universe.
Yeah.
Uh,
I find the zoom out useful. I'm definitely a looking at the forest guy versus looking at the trees kind of guy, you know? I mean, it's sobering to have those moments where you're just like, what is going on actually? It's like, have you heard that like a lot of the cells in your body are actually like other organisms in your gut that aren't human? It's like good bacteria. There's we've got like little mites all over our skin and in our hair and all this stuff. And so the whole question of like where I begin and where I end is another thing that's like all kind of relative and made up. I don't know. As you're talking about like the planets, I also think about the opposite side of it, there's like the macroscopic and the microscopic of like, well, if all of our cells are completely regenerated in 7 years, like where's the Chris here? Like where's the Clayton here? It's like life is more of a process than like a fixed, rigid idea of like this organism. So yeah, I try to have some empathy for the other organisms out there,
that poor
clients,
hustler
people
selling on
people making
eBay.
shirts. You know?
Chris Van Loan II, I have a question for you. You've talked about working with some really cool entrepreneurs, getting to film for them. I've seen you take photos in a very well-known creator's office, Gary Vee. What
Yes.
was that experience like?
That's one of those mind-blowing experiences that I still can't believe actually happened. You know, I was working with Ryan Moran. We actually got to go twice. Got
Wow.
to go to Gary Vee's office in Hudson Yards, downtown New York City. This was actually my first time ever going to New York City. It was really mind-blowing just flying in and looking out the window and seeing like just an ocean of skyscrapers because, you know, Dallas is a big city and Houston's a big city and Austin's like, okay, about 1 million people. But that was just mind blowing. And so many cultures, like immigrants and so much amazing food. And, you know, my main takeaway from those two experiences, the first time I got to actually have lunch with his main video guy at the time, D-Rock. And then the second time we did a tasting of his wine brands, Empathy Wines. So he had all of these different wine bottles we were sampling on the table, got a little tipsy. My main takeaway from these two visits we had were a lot of people say never to meet your heroes because they're going to disappoint you. And Gary Vee is actually the guy who really got me into marketing and vlogging and entrepreneurship. That Gary was even better in person. And what I saw was a man who loves what he does and is like in flow and he loves the game of business. He loves the game of social media. He would be doing this. Like, there's a reason that Gary, I don't know if you remember a while back, he was going to all of these garage sales. And he would go to a garage sale and he would grab this thing for $5 that he knew he could sell for on eBay for $50. Because there's a part of him that I think would just be doing that like without the cameras. There's a part of this guy that loves education, that loves inspiring people, that loves like the game of like the flip. Like, this is a guy who grew up making his first thousands of dollars flipping baseball cards. And so that was the thing, is like I went in a little bit worried that the real guy wasn't going to be exactly like what I was expecting from the internet. And instead, I found something that is like, there's so much authenticity, kindness, generosity. And, you know, I got to meet his brother who heads Vayner Sports division over there. They're like a sports agency. And then I got to meet Gary's dad, Sasha Vaynerchuk, who is, I don't know, like in his 70s or something. And it was just really cool to see the personality in real life outside of YouTube, and really feeling like, in some sense, Gary is like a master, in the sense that some people spend their entire life in meditation and studying spiritual texts, and some people spend their life learning how to make the best sword or be the best swordsman. And this is a guy who's just like, his craft, his art, his love is like hustle, is like business, is like entrepreneurship, marketing, and understanding like social media channels and how other people can leverage social media channels. Like, there's just such a true love of it. And I think what's infectious about these kind of characters is, for us, like normal people, is I think a lot of us would say like, man, I wish there was anything in life I was that passionate about. Because if I'm honest, I don't know if there is anything in life that I can have that same passion for. People would always used to say about Gary is like, is this guy on cocaine? Like, where's all this energy come from? And I think he's just found his lane that energizes him. And maybe I could be that passionate about waking up, jumping out of bed every single day and doing my work if I was in the right stream, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, I think meeting Gary Vee was really inspiring, really awesome. I think he's just better than I even expected, and it makes me think that I think I'm close to finding my zone of genius that's going to keep me in a state of flow. But maybe there's a couple of degrees to the left or the right where I can really be at that level of like mastery.
Would you say there's anybody else out there who is maybe similarly significant as it was meeting Gary? Anybody that stands out?
Man, some cool people out there.
You got to record Teal Swan, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got to film with Teal Swan. We did a podcast with Luke Story here at a big mansion in Austin. She was really sweet. It was funny. If you listen to the internet, people are going to tell you she's a cult leader, but she was so nice and intelligent and gave me a big hug and was just a normal person.
I feel like I think I listened to her on a couple podcasts. One that stands out was Think Tank. Forget who runs that one. The mathematician. Anyways, I think somewhere it was discussed, and Teal was even talking about how, there's this perception of her that her life that is on the camera is the same life that operates off the camera. And I think she tried to even mention, like, no, there are like parts of me that are just totally different and that people don't understand when I'm off the camera. I think she was talking about her relationship with her partner and how she's somebody who on camera looks like has this very probably stern attitude with their partner. It's like separation. I like solitude, but she's like, no, I like to have a lot of duality in the things that we're doing and be very connected.
Like being in like her feminine energy versus on camera, it's more just like, a lot of opinions and stating things very strongly. I will say one other person I'll give some love to, a little shout out. I don't know if you know her, is Brooke Castillo, and she's the owner of the Life Coach School. And this is one of the biggest platforms for people who want to become life coaches. And she's got a great podcast, and I've got to meet her a couple of times in person, film some podcasts with her, and film some presentations she gave on stage. And man, what you were describing about Teal Swan and what is a theme with a lot of these big figures is a innate sense of like charisma and I guess confidence. Like some people just have a certain magic to them, or just being in their presence, it like changes you. And one of the things Brooke, I don't know, when you listen to Brooke, you just can't help but think that anything is possible and all of your dreams can be achieved if you just have like the right mindset and you just go after it. And one of the things, though, that Brooke says is life is 50-50. It's like 50% good, 50% bad. And part of mastering life is just accepting that. And so you get a wife, and now your good things are different and your bad things are different. And then you have a kid, and then you get some new good things, and then you get some new bad things. And like you grow this business, and it's like you keep thinking someday you're going to get to like 100%. Life is just always awesome. And it's like what Brooke would say is like, you just should really make terms with the fact that life is always 50-50. And once you do, there's a peace in that. And we can choose which problems we want to have. It's better to be stressed out about a project that you love. Still stressful. It's better to be stressed out and burnt out and have no time and sleepless nights serving an audience that you really care about versus something you're just like, I don't know, it's just a paycheck. So it's like we can choose what that -50 is going to be, but there's still going to be hardships, and there's something deep about that. But with Brooke, if you ever find the opportunity to listen to one of her podcasts or watch one of her talks on stage, there would be something missing reading it in text or reading the transcript. So much of the charisma is the way she says it.
That energy that vibrates.
It's the energy. Yeah, it's the thing that I can't impart. It's like you would have to be there in the room or in the audience or maybe just on a walk listening to a really good podcast. And she's a woman in her 50s with children who loves to laugh and has an adventurous optimism. So there's something about the message coming from her that's gives you a sense of peace, because it's like coming from like this motherly energy. Even if she is like a badass boss babe, alpha woman.
I'll definitely check that out. That is
I could send you a link.
I want. in my life. So
Yeah, I got to do more podcast reviews.
talking back to podcast people, what I really liked about it was like I felt like I was getting a podcast episode in 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, we're at an hour and a half, and I know as much as I like these discussions, like 40 of the time I feel like even when I listen to like the Diary of a CEO, realistically I can only listen to like 30 minutes or an hour before I have to continue on with something I'm doing that day, or I have to break it
There
up.
is a part of me that just pulls up like the timestamps if they have them in the description. And sometimes I'll just be like, I really just want to listen to this chunk, this portion of the episode. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, I was thinking about this. Part of the joy of like consuming media is sharing it. And I think sharing media is like my love language. So coming back to my family is like one of my favorite things as a kid was watching movies with my dad. And one of my favorite things about the experience was after the 2-hour movie, we would have a 3-hour conversation in the kitchen talking about the themes and the ideas and how the story was told and just the whole process of it.
And that's probably why what you said earlier is so important on dialogue, needing two people to reveal truth. Everything we're building came from some other person's idea, whether it be a movie, piece of music, a
An app,
podcast.
this
And
laptop,
yeah, and
this
one thing that
phone.
I feel like I was always intimidated by was like, you know, I grew up, went to college, and like high school and college just said you can't plagiarize. If anything, you can paraphrase, but you can't plagiarize. So like I came out of that, and now all I see is like, you know, a lot of these great entrepreneurs and influencers, a lot of them are just recreating what other creators are creating and just putting it out in their own message. And now I kind of see like, you know, it's not good to steal somebody else's work, but you know, if you could recreate a message to make it connect with somebody else who they're maybe not connecting with, that
Oh,
works. And
I think about that a lot in
yeah,
my world, Like, so could take this a couple so like historically there is this idea there's kind of like nothing new under the sun. Shakespeare's Hamlet was just like a repurposed like Danish story. So many of these, like before James Cameron's 1997 film Titanic, there were like 10 other previous Titanic films about the Titanic. We're all just like remixing ideas and stuff. But then when I think about it within kind of the attention economy of like influencers today, so much of a podcast or a YouTube channel is just taking a certain message that already exists and imparting your own flavor and energy to it. And it's often so people who are on a similar wavelength will resonate with it. I think about a big influencer here in Austin, Texas, named Cody Sanchez. And she is all about promoting entrepreneurship and helping people get into business and buying boring businesses. She likes to say, like, maybe you should buy a laundromat or something instead of trying to be a TikToker. And while the information is great, it would almost mean less, or it would resonate with a different audience if she wasn't a young Latina woman who's attractive. The reality is, because those words are coming from her, they're going to land with other millennial and Gen Z women in a way that it just wouldn't coming from a guy. And so, yeah,
so
I definitely believe this idea is like, there's really nothing new under the sun with storytelling, films, education. Uh, you know, it's just repackaging it. And I'll never forget when I went to Vid Summit, a content creator conference in Los Angeles, and the founder of Patreon was there on stage giving a talk. And the big piece that I walked away from his talk with is that as creators, we're often really precious about the way the information is delivered. And he would say that we have to be willing to compromise and be willing to meet people where they're at. When you're gifting them something, don't be too particular about what color box it comes in or what kind of ribbon it has on top. Like the core message is the message, but if you need to deliver it in such a way that it'll actually resonate with people, that it kind of like behooves us to package it in such a way that it can be easily consumed by people. And so I think so often with creative types and people who have messages, we get a little stubborn in wanting to do things our way instead of like putting the audience first. And that just always stuck with me because I'm such a visual person. It's such a good visual metaphor to be. It's like, I want to share this message with the world. And it's like, well, if it comes in a blue box or a red box or a green box, like who cares? Like the message is the message.
Well, I have a message that I would wish you would share on this podcast and with the world.
All right, light on me.
What advice do you have out there for anybody who wants to choose the non-traditional path and pursue some sort of creative industry similar to yours?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to start small and don't think that your chapter 1 is going to look like your chapter 100. You know, there's a lot of anxiety, I think, on getting started on going down a path. And that could be like, I want to be a photographer, or I want to run Facebook ads, or, you know, I want to make some craft handmade goods and sell them at a farmer's market or something. And it's like, look at them as experiments, because in my own life and literally everyone I've ever observed, they were never able to accurately predict where that chapter 100 is going to be from the starting line. So often it is this like curvy, twisted route where you're kind of on the right path, but then you take a left over here and then you try this and you kind of like this thing over here, but actually I want to go over here. And so I think that is the biggest trouble I see people getting stuck with. And then the other thing is, the reason I said to start small is because people also think they need to leave a good, steady job to pursue their passion. And sometimes that's the quickest way to destroy your passion for that thing, is now when you're reliant upon it for income. The best way to purely find out what is going to resonate best for you is to dabble, is to try it out, is to do a 30-day test or a 90-day test, or to start trying these creative pursuits on the weekends and in the evenings and on holidays and whenever you can get started. So yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
Love that. I definitely heard that same message come through my ears in a podcast I was just listening to the other day. The guest who was on had said that every abundant opportunity that provides for me right now was started without a money motive in front of it. I pursued it because I had a lot of joy in doing it. I never thought it was going to provide for me, and it ultimately ended up doing that because I was able to pursue it relentlessly. I wish I could plug that podcast and the person who had that message, but I can't. But it literally, you just repeated in your own message those words of wisdom.
One more thing I'll add is, it's like, if I could speak to my younger self, is when you feel called to create something, think about how you would feel in 5 or 10 years if you didn't get started and give it a shot. Because I have
Amen.
so many, as I'm now here at 36, like the things that really haunt me are not the things that I tried and failed, but the things that I didn't even try.
Believe that.
I remember one time I got started on a documentary and I got stuck in the editing room because it was like really complex. One of the issues with documentaries is like the shooting ratio is sometimes like 100-to-1 of like the footage you've captured versus what's going to make the final cut. And it was about this musician and these filmmakers, and it was about culture. And it was like so much that I hit like a analysis paralysis in the editing room. And the opportunity kind of came and went. And I actually had some connections with like Mark Duplass and Jay Duplass, these big filmmakers, to maybe like get it on some screens. And when I look back, I don't care like if it would have gotten any awards or if it would have made any money. The regret is that I didn't really finish it. And I did kind of a rough cut like a year and a half or 2 years later, but like the time had passed. You know, I remember when I was still in college, I guess, I developed this really interesting style of photography that looked like a comic book, that looked like a graphic novel with like really thick black lines. And I started creating these templates to put actual photography that had been heavily modified into a comic book structure where, you have like the white frames and you have like the text bubbles.
Yeah.
Like if you've ever seen like Watchmen or, any of these kind of graphic novels. And I had like so many ideas for like, of things I got started on and didn't really have the follow through on. And so, yeah, I would just say do these things for yourself without that attachment to the external results, because I don't know, it's like, man, I still think when I'm like on my deathbed at 80 or 90 or 100 years old or whenever, yeah, it's not going to be the things that like failed. It's going to be the things I didn't even really try.
Well, I'm so grateful that you tried being on this podcast today.
We're here.
Truly,
We did it.
You are a part of the stepping stone for me. Me knowing that I would have regret if I didn't pursue this again.
And like I said, with this upcoming attempted podcast with my grandma Doris, it's one of those things where I'm like, man, if I don't try, I'm going to regret it. So I got to at least try. I'll report back if it happens.
Yeah,
but
please
super
do.
Exciting.
And please give one more final message on where any one of my million followers on Making Insight could find you.
Yeah, best place to find me is Chris Van Loan II on Instagram. That's Chris Van Loan II, like the Roman numerals, or go to my website, vanloanfilm.co.
Thank you again for being here and sharing all of this about your life and creative work that you're out here doing. So being
first. Yeah, thank you for having me, Clayton. It's been a pleasure, and I hope the listeners get something out of this too.